raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome back, Patriots, to another edition of the Raising Cain Show. Tonight, we've got a really great guest, and we are going to get into the topics that really everybody's talking about right now. What's happening in Iran, what's happened in Venezuela, what's been going on in Africa. And we really have one of the best people to get into that topic, somebody who is what I would consider one of the best experts on this type of information, and that is former U.S. Army intelligence officer, retired Colonel Chris Wyatt. We're going to do what we always do. We go to our commercial breaks, get that out of the way, because you're not going to want to, to have anything interrupted tonight. So go get your popcorn now, and you're going to want to sit down and take a seat and listen to this tonight, because I think you're going to get informed about what's really going on. We will be right back after a short break.
Heard of Q Broadcast? It's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q Broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get access to every channel you could ever want, including HBO, Cinemax, and Stars. And the best part? There are no contracts, no hidden fees, and you're free to cancel anytime. With Q Broadcast, you can enjoy streaming live TV, movies, and top series on up to 5 devices at once. Whether you're at home or on the go, Q Broadcast makes sure your entertainment is always at your fingertips. Imagine being able to watch all your favorite channels from anywhere, anytime, without any restrictions. We're talking about thousands of movies, hundreds of TV series, and a huge library of live channels, all in one place. And don't forget video on demand and pay-per-view events. Those are included at no extra cost, so you'll never miss a big event again. Now, take a second and think about your current cable bill. You're probably paying anywhere between $100 and $300 every month, locked into long-term contracts and hit with surprise rate increases. With Q Broadcast, that's a thing of the past. It's just $60 a month. No contracts, no extra fees, no hidden costs, and no price hikes. Why juggle multiple subscriptions like Netflix, Hulu, and cable when Q Broadcast gives you everything you need in one convenient package? People everywhere are switching to Q Broadcast, saving money and getting more content than ever before. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and sign up for Q Broadcast today. Just $60 a month, no contracts, no hidden fees. It's time to take control of your entertainment and start streaming smarter.
Since 2017, 150,000 farms have shut down, and working farmland has been reduced by 21 million acres. The system has been crippling the remaining farmers, forcing some to adopt nefarious farming techniques, like pumping hormones and other performance-enhancing drugs into their cows so they can survive in crammed feedlots. Or the farmers are forced to jump ship and sell to land-hoarding, profit-chasing agricultural oligarchies, who use their billions of dollars to crush the competition and increase your family's dependence on their manufactured food. What could possibly go wrong? The family farm will soon be a thing of the past, unless you do something. You can. That's why there's From the Farm, an industry-disrupting platform that connects consumers directly with local farmers, which means you can buy fresh, non-factory farm food, and you'll know exactly where your food came from and how it was raised. For the first time in nearly 100 years, independent farms will have a way to not only survive, but thrive. From the Farm was founded by A.J. Richards, an active homesteader, and Brooke Entz, a CrossFit Games athlete and an Amazonian warrior in the movies Wonder Woman and Justice League. She clearly has a passion for healthy food and a healthy lifestyle. And since both AJ and Brooke come from generations of ranchers and farmers, they know what they're talking about. We can't do this alone. We need the strength of the American people behind us. Help us build a new food system that combines the wisdom of the past with the technology of the future. Investing in From the Farm isn't just a financial decision. It's an investment into our future, our small family farms, and our food sovereignty. Invest today.
Welcome back, folks, and thanks for sticking with us on the Raising Cain Show. Tonight, we're taking a hard look at what's happening in Iran and why it matters to every American. The Iranian people are rising up against a brutal regime. And the contrast between strong leadership and weak leadership couldn't be clearer. Joining me is retired U.S. Army Intelligence Colonel Chris Wyatt, a man who has spent his career confronting terrorism and hostile regimes head on. We're talking about Iran, global instability, President Trump's unapologetic stance against terror states, and what happens when America leads with strength instead of surrender. Colonel, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, Nate, it's a pleasure to be back with you. I appreciate it. A rather eventful time. Can you even begin to imagine? I mean, even the most optimistic of us who look back at November of 2024 and with a sense of great relief saw that an election wasn't stolen from us. We, with a sense of relief, could we even have predicted the change that's occurred in the world over the past year? I think one thing we could have predicted was the response of the elites, of the leftists, of the rhinos, of the European feckless leaders who they're upset because their little perfect order of destroying the world and taking away our liberties is being upset by Trump. But Trump has reordered the world with tariffs and made it fairer trade for America. He's onshoring industrial production back to America. And he is letting tyrants know that a new day is dawn. We are not going to tolerate your behavior anymore. It's just shocking. And it's time the mullahs pay attention to what he said.
You know, that's maybe a good starting point, is discussing what has happened in the global shift of power just by simply taking out Maduro. And maybe not just by that, but by taking him out and taking him out in such a way to where they actually got him alive and, you know, with no American losses. It's unprecedented. You know, in your time in the military, I mean, have you seen an operation that successful before?
I have, but not on that scale. I've seen it going after the people identified as war criminals in the Balkans, the PIFWIC program, and things like that. I've also seen other things, but on this scale, to take the head of a state, no. Who has seen that? That's something of its own, and it's truly amazing, this operation. But the stage was set by Trump strengthening America economically, strengthening America geopolitically, and that started earlier in the year when he started sending a message out. And now it's just continuing. Now we've withdrawn from 66 feckless organizations around the world, 31 of them from the United Nations that accomplished nothing except take money from us and harm our interests. But this all started with Trump making it very clear and unequivocally that we do not promote people, we do not support people, we do not advance people based on immutable factors. We are not into diversity, equity, inclusion, which is really a lack of diversity, exclusion. That's what that is. We promote people, we advance people based on their merit and what they can contribute and who they are. We don't leave behind those who don't have the capabilities, but it's about merit. And with that shift in turning the DEI pipeline off, going after universities that have been destroying this country from within, going after corporate boards that have been destroying us within, sent a clear message. Then the tariffs came. The tariffs were intended to send a message to the world. You know, the Europeans whine about the tariffs, but every car that we shipped to Europe before Trump put the tariffs in place had a 10% automatic tariff. Yet cars from Europe had a 2% tariff entering the United States. Now, how is that fair? And it's worse than that, because every European country has a value-added tax. Many states don't have sales tax, or they have a reasonable sales tax, which is different. The value-added tax typically is 15% or higher. So if you sell a car in Sweden, it's 25% value-added tax plus a 10% tariff. That car already is 35% less competitive, and that's unfair. That's Europeans. South Africans ban our pork from coming to the country, not because it's inferior, but because they don't want competition. They put 70% tariffs on our chicken imports to South Africa. And then they whine when we say, wait, for 25 years, we've given you duty-free access to our country. Trump says no more. You're not getting in our country for free. It's not a free ride. We have been robbed. We have been pillaged. We have been screwed by our politicians for 40 years while people looked the other way and ignored it because we're nice people. Well, we've been put in a position of being a creditor nation, lending the world money, to being a debtor nation with $40 trillion of debt. In no small measure, not just because of entitlement programs, but because we've been the world's police and we've let the world charge us for being their police. How stupid is that?
Yep. Now, that brings up a good point. A lot of people, even some people on the right who I used to respect, and I'll be honest with you, I've lost a lot of my respect for many of them, that clearly they've showed their cards that they are isolationists. And that, which I don't think ever serves us. One thing's clear: if there is a power vacuum, somebody will fill it. And if the United States is not being the leader in the world, China, Russia, whoever else is going to jump in there and fill that hole, and it's going to be a lot less safe of a world. So I am all for not being the world's police, but I do think that we have a responsibility, and not just to the world, but for ourselves, to be the world's leader. There's no doubt about that.
Well, in fact, over the past 3 decades plus, we have vacillated. We came out of the Cold War, and Francis Fukuyama wrote The End of History, which a lot of people ridicule. But the point he was trying to make is that things change now, but they didn't change for the better. We had Clinton with naive foreign policy, with his national security strategy of engagement and enlargement, which meant that we're supposed to bring everybody to the table and give everybody a voice. That's all fine and dandy. And if you want to believe in liberalism and its evil friend constructivism when it comes to international relations theory, okay, but it just doesn't work. The reality is as clear as it's been since Thucydides wrote on the Peloponnesian War, and he drafted the Malian Dialogue. When the Athenians attacked the small island of Malea, who'd done nothing, they didn't harm the interests of Athens. They weren't against Athens. They traded freely with them, but Athens just wanted to establish a colony there. So they attacked, they wiped out, they slaughtered all the males, they enslaved the kids and the women and shipped them off to Anatolia, and it became an Athenian colony. And what Thucydides said in the Malian Dialogue is the strong will do what they want, the weak will suffer what they must. And as soon as people realize that, that's the reality of the world. We allowed the rise of China. We facilitated the rise of China. China was nothing, less than a $2 trillion economy when Bill Clinton and Congress foolishly sponsored their entry into the World Trade Organization, an organization whose rules they violated from day one and continue to violate with trademark theft, with copyright infringement, with industrial espionage, currency manipulation, and also protectionist policies which keep our products out of their country while they ship all their crap over here. And they've also done real harm. I mean, they have poor, lax standards. They've shipped pet food, which killed tens of thousands of our pets because it was contaminated with antifreeze. People have forgotten about that. And they are a threat and a menace to Asia. In Asia, what they've done is they've threatened Taiwan. They've done live fire naval exercises surrounding the island and shooting live ammunition at the island, saying it's a training exercise to intimidate Taiwan. They have come up with their fictitious 9-dash line from some fantasy that extends their territorial waters all the way down to Indonesia. That's ludicrous. They're claiming the entire South China Sea. This was actually a case that went to International Court of Justice, and they lost. So what do? They just ignore it. They send their Coast Guard out. They fire water cannons at Filipino fishing boats. They board boats. They arrest people. They harass them. They build their own naval bases and airfields on fragile ecological systems on coral atolls. They're a rogue state, and we've facilitated this because of the vacuum of American presence. Well, those days are over. Trump is back. And the first term was just a practice run. It's on for real now, and the world needs to wake up to that reality.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many of these things that are happening right now. They're happening so rapidly, but it's clear that this wasn't just a quick decision to go into Venezuela, for example. This sounds like this was several months in the making, if not at least some years worth of planning. What's your assessment of that?
Well, I think it's a fair assessment. First off, having worked at combatant commands, the U.S. European Command, U.S. Africa Command, and worked with others, Central Command and Northern Command, among others, and briefly with Southern Command, but I didn't really spend any time with it. I just visited them a couple of times. But having worked in these commands, I know that we have planners. That's their job. We have colonels and lieutenant colonels and staff NCOs, and that's what they do. So if you go back to the Gulf War, which I was a participant in the early 1990s, that conflict, when they needed an option to evict Iraq from Kuwait, they went with what they call the Hail Mary operation, the Hail Mary pass. Well, what happened? Of course, that comes from Football Reference, but that plan was drafted by planners years prior. It was on the shelf. Of course, back then we didn't have computers with all the plans. They were just on paper and acetate and, rolled up and that sort of thing. They went on the shelf and blew the dust off and said, hey, this looks like it might work. They beefed it up with a lot more troops than they originally planned for, and it was a slightly different scenario, but that's the plan. So there is always a plan taking place. There's always somebody in a military uniform somewhere plotting, what happens if the United States has to deploy to the Falkland Islands? We would never deploy there. Well, what if we did? What if the United States had to invade Greenland to do? What? Well, imagine if they find out the Northern Command has a plan on the shelf to invade Greenland. They probably do. They'd all freak out right now. But that's just a course of events. You plan for every contingency, and then you pull the plans off the shelf and you adjust as necessary. So I think that I got a little down a rabbit hole there where I was going with that. But
hey, I used to work for Fleet Battle Lab.
Okay.
In Yokosuka, Japan. Worked in the command cave and worked on the modeling simulation war games that were always being done. So I can neither confirm nor deny everything you've just talked about.
Well, I mean, look,
there were plans for just about everything.
Yeah, the CENTCOM plan is a matter of public record. They told everybody they had the plan. I mean, it's a matter of historical record, so we're not disclosing anything there. But people just need to realize that, that's why it's so hilarious, Nate, when a number of criminals broke into the Capitol building on January 6th when I was there covering as a journalist. That happened after I left. I left about 2:25 before anything happened because it was cold and boring. So I'd covered the event. People were exercising their right to seek redress from government. That was what I was there for. So I left. But when a few dozen people like that broke in, and then 800, 1,000 people foolishly walked into the building when the doors were open, when that happened, there was this nonsense. It's an insurrection, but I'm like, where's the artillery? Where are the tanks? Where are the guns? I mean, who's burning down the Capitol building? Nothing. And oh, by the way, apparently the people who make those statements have no concept of continuity of government. If you take out Congress, our government actually probably work a lot more efficiently. Just be honest here, but it's not going to slow down our government. The government isn't run by Congress. All they do is create laws that abrogate our liberty. It's actually the executive branch that runs the government, and you'd have to have a more successful strike against them. But even so, there's continuity of government. We have redundancy plans, redundancy communications, lots of locations. We spend billions of dollars on this. The stupidity of talking about that. There's always a plan. The U.S. government, if it does one thing well, it makes plans. Whether it follows the plans or not, it's a different story. But it makes plans for eventualities, and they've got plans for everything, including the apocalypse.
There's a couple of other things that I want to talk to you about related specifically to Venezuela, and then I want to get into Iran. One, the fact that they captured Maduro and his wife alive, I find that fascinating because I would imagine, and I was not an intel officer, but I was around plenty of them, but I would imagine that the ability to harvest intelligence from a live captor who was the dictator of a country that was cooperating with our enemies and possibly colluding with even some enemies within our own country. I imagine that there's going to be a lot of intel that is gathered out of his capture. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you 100%. Not only intelligence, actionable intelligence. It's current. It's not like the guy we've had in Guantanamo Bay for 25 years now that knows nothing about current operations of Al Qaeda. This is actually a guy who's been running an organization right there and coordinating with other narco-terrorist leaders in Latin America. So it's going to give us information about other states and other activities. And if he doesn't, then life will be uncomfortable for him. He's 60, 63, 64 years old. So he has to make a decision how comfortable he wants the rest of his life to be. He can be obstinate, but there's no way in God's green acre that this man ever returns to Venezuela. It just isn't going to happen. He could say goodbye to Venezuela and say, welcome to a jail in Brooklyn or Manhattan, or Supermax facility somewhere around the United States, Colorado or somewhere like that, unless he cooperates. I understand that Alder James just passed away. Good riddance to that evil bastard. I hope he rots in hell. And then, of course, Noriega passed away a few years ago. So these people that betray our nation, whether Americans or otherwise, deserve a horrible fate. But this guy can be offered all kinds of things to offer up information. And I suspect a lot of what he'll share, we know, and this will serve as confirmation. or a secondary source or tertiary source to take action against others. Look, the boats that were zipping through the Caribbean, that just wasn't by happenstance. We didn't just go, oh, look, there's a speedboat, let's blow it up.
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know that, I know that, but a lot of people think that they're just out there crazy looking for boats.
Oh
And
yeah,
shooting
you're blowing up fishing boats. Yeah, right.
yeah. Fishing boats look just like that. I mean, I know everybody.
Mhm.
I got to tell you though, when you throw that line out and you're going about 70 knots an hour, that line doesn't stand up very long, and you run out of line pretty quickly as it trails behind you, chasing you. You know, it's just silly people. There's a lot of stupid people in this world. They really are, and they think they know what they're talking about. Like people who block public streets in Minneapolis and think that they're just protesting. You're committing a criminal act. You're disrupting a federal law enforcement operation. You're endangering public safety. And you put your life in your own hands, and we saw that happen tragically, unfortunately, in Minneapolis for an idiot who cost themselves their life. And now the life of a federal law enforcement officer has been put into disarray. A man who was drugged by a vehicle just a few months ago, several hundred feet, and nearly died. And then this woman puts him in jeopardy again. The arrogance of these people in this country who behave like this is just beyond the pale. And the reason, Nate, if I could digress for a second, the reason why we have this situation in America is because we've tolerated misbehavior for 4 decades. We have not punished people for their crimes. And the worst part of this, and I blame some of this at President Trump's feet. I lay it right there. In the summer of 2020, the summer of love, when we had a genuine insurrection in Seattle at the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, where people declared their own country free of U.S. rule, we did nothing. We let them get away with it. We didn't shut down the cell phone towers. We didn't turn off the water. We didn't shut off their electricity and starve them out. We didn't go in and take them out. We tolerated this, and then it metastasized and spread all over the country, all over a fake narrative, a man that is dead because he took fentanyl, not because a police officer put him in a chokehold. And that narrative, that man's in prison now, still to this day. It's shocking what's happened. We have not punished bad behavior. People have gotten away with all kinds of things, billions of dollars of damage in summer of 2020, and almost nobody prosecuted for it. And now they're coming back again because they feel they're empowered to behave this way. Well, I got bad news for them. There's a new sheriff in town. And if you're, or Michelle Wu in Boston, Brandon Johnson in Chicago, or you are out there in Portland, or you find yourself in Minneapolis, Mr. Jacob Frey, you need to wake up, because your actions are criminal. They violate federal statutes and oftentimes state statutes, and you are facilitating sedition and insurrection against the United States. And if you think we won't invoke the Insurrection Act, keep it coming, buddy. It's coming for you.
That's an interesting question, and I don't mind diverting onto this because it all ties together, right? What do all of these rogue states have in common, and what do these people disrupting, things in our own country have in common? They're all Marxists. They're all socialists. That is clearly, the root that is this root of evil that is behind all of this stuff. And one of the things that I saw that I was shocked at was I think it was Philadelphia County Sheriff, coming out and publicly stating on the news that if ICE sets foot in her, jurisdiction, that she will have them arrested. What an arrogant thing to say. Clearly, she doesn't know the law. And I have to say that when I see that kind of nonsense, because these are people who are basically, they're not just randomly going and targeting somebody standing on the street corner because they look Mexican or something. That's not how this works. These people are executing warrants for people who either failed to appear, or for people who are already been, they've already been convicted of a crime, and they need to get the hell out of our country, or they have to go to jail. A lot of these people that they've been going after are serial rapists, are serial sexual abusers, and pedophiles. And that's who these people are defending.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look there, Saint George Floyd. That guy's, give me a break, and they have no empathy for the raped and murdered mothers and women in our country who had promising lives, the Laken Rileys of this country, the woman who's murdered in Frederick, just an hour south of me, brutally murdered, or over in Harford County, Maryland, just to the northeast of there. They have no empathy for these people. They allow our country to hear the nonsense about, they're coming and breaking families apart, and these people are longtime residents. Oh, so because they've been here criminally for 20 years, they deserve a free pass. No, they are illegal criminal alien invaders. They violated our sovereignty, abrogated our rights, invaded our country, lowered our wages, put our people at risk, and caused problems. They're not immigrants. I'm sick of this lie. They're not immigrants. Immigrants come to your border, present themselves with a passport, enter legally on a visa, announce their intention to stay. We welcome them if we want them here. They stay, they get permanent residency, they behave, they obey the law, and they contribute to society. Immigrants are not migrants. Migrants are not criminal alien invaders. These 30 million people are criminal alien invaders, and they need to be removed and excised from the body. They are driving up home prices. They are reducing public safety. They are bringing infectious disease in this country. All that's true. And that's not xenophobia, because I'm not going to hear from your audience, but people start with their nonsense. Oh, that's just a xenophobe, typical white racist who doesn't know anything, probably too lazy to learn languages. Well, I speak 6 languages, and 3 of them are African languages. And I've spent the majority of my life overseas defending this country and protecting people around the world, especially people of color. So they can shove it in their shorts. They don't know what they're talking about. The bottom line is you cannot have a country that is bifurcated or divided. In fact, we're getting worse. We're going from bifurcated to multifurcated, if that's even a word. We're having a country being divided by these enclaves, which look at what happened in Jersey City today. They raised the Pakistani flag on a flagpole in Jersey City. What is that? That's New Jersey, not Lahore, excuse me. That's ridiculous. And what's going on in Minneapolis? You know, and you see it. They openly say, we need to be here in concentration so we can bring the laws. But their first loyalty of Ilhan Omar is not to the Constitution. It's to Somalia.
That's right.
Get out. My first loyalty is to America, not to Somalia.
And that brings up another point too. You know, I think a lot of Americans are uneducated about, about how immigration is supposed to work and about how refugee status is supposed to work. Refugees are not supposed to be, they don't, just because somebody's here on refugee status doesn't mean that they become a citizen. It doesn't mean that, they are basically here for the duration of whatever the incident that's going on in their country. And then they're supposed to go back. And then on that note, they're not even supposed to be coming to America from places like Somalia. They're supposed to go to the nearest nation to them. And that's been the law for a very long time, but yet it's been ignored.
Well, in fact, what you're talking about is the international standard. The first safe haven you reach after fleeing is the place you're supposed to register as a refugee with the United Nations organization and the High Commission, and that's where you can gain refugee status. What happens is people go to those first safe havens, and then they shop for destinations, whether it's the Netherlands, Germany, UK, or the US, and that's what happens here. And we bring refugees in. In fact, the only people legitimately that should be refugees coming to America, in my view, are Canadians or Mexicans, if they have the real case, because they're on our borders. No one else is on our border. No one else borders this country. So that's the bottom line. But the reality is that we've taken 2.9 million refugees in under the Immigration Nationality Act of 1980. Most of them people, so-called people of color. And you're right about refugees. The important thing to note here, a refugee, a legal refugee who comes here is typically a person that goes to a third country, and then we process them there and we do a serious vetting to make sure they're not a risk or a danger to our society. And then we bring them into our country and put them in neighborhoods all over the country. Most people don't know this is happening. And next thing you know, your neighborhood is flooded with people from Somalia or people from the Ukraine who don't share our values, who don't share our mores, who are suddenly staying. But a refugee is not a citizen. They don't get the right to vote, and they cannot apply for permanent residency until they've been in the country for 12 consecutive months. Once they've been here 12 months, they can apply for a green card. And because they're a refugee, they'll be granted that green card. It just may take a little time, bureaucracies. With the green card, after 5 years of continuous residence in the United States, if they like, they can apply for citizenship, and some do. But your point about refugees, in theory, refugees aren't supposed to be permanent resettlement. It's supposed to be a temporary measure until the underlying cause of your fleeing from your home country is resolved. If the communist state is overthrown and democracy comes, in theory, you should go home. So for instance, now the 606,000 Venezuelans who have temporary protected status, which is not refugee, it's a separate thing altogether, they should return to Venezuela now, in theory. I know they're not going to, but Trump will probably at some point in a year or so revoke their temporary protected status and make them go back to Venezuela, because we gave you refuge, succor, protection. It's time to go home now. You weren't brought here to make anchor babies and live in America. We didn't ask you to immigrate here. We protected you. But the bottom line with this state is that refugees never go home. They never go home. They come here. Almost none of them ever return to the place they come from. So once a person comes to America, you can pretty much guarantee that their progeny are going to be American citizens because they'll be born here.
That's a very good point. Yep. So that's all the more reason why it's extremely important that we are vetting and ensuring that the people who are coming here are people who are going to assimilate to American culture and values.
Indeed,
so
and
the other question I wanted to ask, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, sorry, that's it. We had a little breakup in the communication there, the network. What I was going to say is that that's been one of the secret sauces for American success. Yes, we before the modern age of air transport and space travel and telecommunications, we were distant. We were protected by the Atlantic Pacific, and so the threats were far away. That was a key to our success. Also, it was a rather small indigenous population on the continent that was easily overwhelmed and colonized by mass numbers of people coming from Europe, which facilitated. But there's also a common bond of an Anglo-Saxon culture and a common language of English that people assimilate to. The Italians and the Irish, well, more so the Italians, but other Europeans who came to America and landed in New York or Philadelphia and Baltimore, the Germans, they quickly learned English in the first generation, and their offspring learn the language, and they assimilate. They accept the values. There are groups that retain their unique cultural distinctiveness. For instance, the old Spanish families of the Southwest, that was not even Mexico, it was Spain, in New Mexico and parts of Southern California and Texas. They still do cotillion. They're Roman Catholics. Many of them still speak Spanish as a language, and they have that culture, which they've retained for centuries. But they're Americans first and foremost. The Amish and Mennonites came here. Many of the Amish still speak German. It's a funny German from the 17th century, but it's German nonetheless. But they've retained their unique cultural distinctiveness, and they contribute to our society. The Cajuns, the Acadians who came from Canada, the French Canadians who fled and wound up in Louisiana, among other places, they have a unique
Some of my relatives.
there you go. They have a unique cultural aspect, but they are first and foremost Americans. My friend Blake Thibodeau is not a Cajun. He's an American. Then he's a Cajun. And so these people coming now are bifurcating. They're establishing colonies of people in Maine, in Minneapolis, in Virginia, in all over the country, and they're dividing this country, and we've allowed this. I mean, the Biden administration letting 18,000 Haitians land in Springfield, Ohio, a town of 41,000, which suddenly has nearly a 60,000 population, and they're almost, it's insane. You cannot do this. Now, this doesn't mean that people have to abandon their cultural norms. You can retain it. If it's important to you, you will inculcate it in your children, and they will carry it forward in future generations. If it wasn't that important, it'll disappear. That's the bottom line. But we are being colonized and balkanized, and this is detrimental to the good order of our society. It needs to be stopped.
Absolutely. The other thing I wanted to ask you about the operation down there in Venezuela is I don't think a lot of people really understand the impact of when Trump makes comments like, we're going to control the oil, we're going to basically run things down there. Why is that so important?
Well, I think the concern here is that the oil's been misused to prop up an illegitimate regime, which has imprisoned thousands of people, executed many others summarily, and also used sex and rape as a weapon against women and men in prison to destroy them and break them. And also nationalized under his predecessor Chavez, nationalized everything, and frankly stole the hundreds of billions of dollars investment that U.S. Corporations put into Venezuela to develop its oil industry, because they have no technology, no ability to do it, and it's fallen apart without us there. So what Trump is talking about is securing that so that that industry can prosper to the benefit of Venezuelans, and also so that it's not a detriment to the United States national security. I think that's the real point that Trump's trying to make here. Sometimes the president's language is not as sharp as it should be. It's a little blunt, and people interpret it whatever they want, and they're welcome to. But what I encourage people to do is look at President Trump's actions. His actions speak louder than his words. He does a lot of rhetoric. If you call him names, he'll dig his heels in, and he will fight back, and he'll call you names. Remember little Marco and Lion Ted and all that nonsense? And now they're all best buddies, you know? So the point, in fact, Marco Rubio is turning out to be one of the best secretaries of state we've seen in a long time.
Seriously.
I was not impressed with him as a senator. I thought he was weak and milquetoast, but as a secretary of state, this man is really impressing me. I mean, I might even consider, bringing my standard around to consider him for the election next time around.
I absolutely look, I understand a lot of people like Vance. There's a lot of things I like about Vance, but what I am seeing in Marco Rubio is somebody who really understands foreign policy. And I think that's one of the most important issues for any American president that they've got to have a handle on. Because look what happens when they don't understand it. It destroys our own country and our own economy.
Well, I mean, look at Clinton, look at Obama, look at Biden, just total disasters. And that's why we're in the mess we're in now. That's why these states act with impunity. They think that, you rattle your finger. Obama, line in the sand, nothing happened. They use gas. If these people think the United States won't respond. That's the most important message Donald Trump is sending. Don't mess with the bear, because you're going to get bit.
Yeah. There's, it's interesting because I think the impact of Venezuela and the control of oil, the embargo that they are enforcing, I think this is going to ultimately, I think it's going to impact helping to bring an end to the Ukraine-Russia war, because Russia, I think that's been a big, way that they have been, financing themselves is by trading and selling arms to Venezuela. Also, buying oil. China, I think it cuts them off, it chokes them off from their largest, the largest trading partner for Venezuela was China. And I think cutting them off, I think is hugely important because of their Belt and Road Initiative, which is, it's just a guise for, world domination and, and through indebtedness in all of these countries around the world, many of them in Africa, where they now own the ports. I think it's critically important to keep them out of our backyard. And I think it's important to choke them off from one of the world's largest oil supplies. So I think that if we can get, hopefully this has sent a clear message to China and to Russia. They better not be messing around in our backyard. I'm hoping that what we end up gaining from this is some greater stability and peace in South America as well. And I noticed that what was it, the president of Colombia came out in condemnation against Trump, but then all of a sudden now he's all lovey-dovey and
so Gustavo Petro. Gustavo Petro, you might remember famously earlier last year, we had sent a C-17 with a plane load of his criminal alien invaders from Colombia, convicted rapists, murderers, and child abusers on a plane. Now, before that military flight ever left, of course, it had permission for overflight for any country it was flying over to get to Colombia, and also had landing rights. We don't leave unless we have country clearance. The aircraft took off an hour before it landed. He thought he'd be clever and he'd show up Trump. And so he went and told his air traffic control, deny them landing rights. We refuse to allow them. And they went on the radio and said, we will not be bullied. We are a sovereign state, essentially something along those lines. Well, Trump was on the golf course at Doral, if I remember correctly. And you can see the footage when he takes a phone call. He pulls his cell phone out and he goes, 50% tariffs today, 100% next week, 50% on top of that the following week. And then within an hour, Gustavo Petro backed down. And not only did he back down and they radioed the aircraft and said, come back, please, and deliver those criminals. He also sent his personal jet to the United States to pick up more criminals. This guy is an idiot of the highest order, but he'll be out of office by August. He's term limited unless he overthrows the government. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him get an indictment against him. But, it's interesting here. You talk about Venezuela, and let me just link this back all the way to Iran. Stick with me on this. This is going to be interesting, okay? So by sending a message to tin pot dictators that we can take you out at any time of our choosing, anywhere on the planet. I mean, we did with Soleimani.
We'll go into your home and nab you right out of your bedroom.
That's right. Yeah, your PJs won't be on. Make sure you've turned the porn off before we get there. You don't want to be embarrassed because the special forces guys will catch it all on their body cams. Watching porn. No, but seriously. So we took out Soleimani in Iraq. And had no compunction about doing that. And so Iran, got a message, but then they were put back in a box for a couple of years, but then they've come back out of it because of what Biden allowed to happen. But we can take you out anytime, anywhere at our discretion, and the global order will not stop us. You don't like that? Sorry, but that's the reality. Until the Alpha Centaurians land on Earth and change the world order, that's kind of how things are. So that's the first thing. So, Donald Trump is playing 3D chess with the Borg Collective. And these idiots are playing checkers with Barney Fife and Mayberry. They've been telling me how stupid Trump is and how Trump doesn't know anything. Yet Trump has been 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of all of them. All of this links. If you look at it, it's linked. The tariffs are linked by reordering, rebasing, and reshoring industrial base here. $20 trillion investment and rising coming back to America, lowering taxes in the first term on businesses so that cash trillions of dollars was repatriated back to the American banking system. It was offshore in the Jersey Islands, the Guernseys, the Caymans. That money came flooding back into America. All of this plays a role, making America stronger and healthier. Getting control of our borders, kicking out the riffraff, all this plays a role. But by sending a message, taking out Maduro, you've warned tip-pot dictators that it's a new day. We can do it anytime we want. We don't care about your sovereignty. That isn't germane. This is our hemisphere, and our neighbors are going to get protection, and we're not going to tolerate misbehaviors. But here's the thing, the oil. So what about the Venezuelan oil? You're correct. A lot of it goes to China. Now China's weakened, and China's been proven to be not a reliable, powerful player. These idiots thought, well, we'll side with the Chinese. They'll stand up to the Americans. But what have they done? Nothing. They're powerless in the Western Hemisphere. So we've shown they're weak. We've also shown the Russians and their vaulted military equipment is a waste of money. We can shut it down. You better wait for the S-500 because the S-300, 400 don't work. And then on top of that, the link back to Russia, and we'll get to Iran, the link back to Russia, the shadow fleet of over 1,000 ships flying with false flags or no flags around the world every day of the year has been fueling Iran and Venezuela, Cuba, and Russia, and North Korea for that matter. And now we are catching these ships at sea like it should have been done all along, and we are impounding these ships, and this is have a devastating impact on what little cash is coming in to the Russian state, and this will push them to the table to end the conflict even more, I think. And the Iranians, same situation. This oil was going back and forth, the ships to Iran. They're also transiting oil from Iran, and this is a problem that is not good for dictators when someone stands up for right and order in the international order. I'm hearing South African politicians cry about, the rules-based international order. There are no rules-based international order. People ignore it. If there was a rules-based international order, then the Chinese wouldn't be attacking ships in the South China Sea because the International Court of Justice gave a binding decision, says, retreat. It's not your territory. Go away, you silly Englishman. Your mother was a hamster and your father smelled of elderberries.
Monty Python. Oh, yeah.
Silly Englishman, go away. That's basically how the Chinese treat it. But so we see these proxies for Iran all over the planet. Iran is a dangerous actor. They've emboldened Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Israel, and the Houthis in Yemen. But also they have other proxies. The African National Congress in South Africa does the bidding of Tehran. And now they find themselves in a very awkward spot tonight, Nate. As you and I chat tonight, the Iranians, the Chinese, and the Russians, all the good states in the world, are in South Africa in a naval exercise for a week, working together, while Iran is imploding and they're murdering civilians. That's not a good look for the African National Congress.
Yep. Nope, you're absolutely right. Speaking of that, what is going on right now in Nigeria? We hear about Christians being slaughtered there. Can you give us a breakdown of what the situation there, who's propping these guys up? Where is all this coming from?
So one of the first things we should say is Nigeria is a very strange state. It's got about 220 million population, multi-ethnic, multilinguistic. It's Christians, Muslims, and animists, but mostly Christians and Muslims. And generally speaking, the northern part of the country, the northern half is Muslim, the southern half is Christian. It's not as simple as that. There's Christians, Muslims everywhere, but the predominance of people is those groups in each area. So it's a very difficult country to hold as a unified state. They've had lots of corruption, misuse of the oil revenue for decades. All kinds of the dictators around the country in the past. They've intervened in the affairs of other states in the region as a military power in Sierra Leone, in Liberia repeatedly, and other places, also in Niger and Mali. So here, the situation is that there are multiple conflicts ongoing in Nigeria right now. You have a conflict between what is now ISWAP, the Islamic State in West Africa province, or something like that. They are the ones that are the successor to Boko Haram, which is still around, but they've kind of become that. And these people pledge loyalty to Al-Qaeda and to the ISIS, or to ISIS particularly. But they're just a bunch of terrorists for the most part. And they terrorize Muslims and Christians alike. They go after innocent civilians. Then you also have brigands, armed thugs who attack places and demand ransom. And that's a big moneymaker, kind of like it's been in Latin America for decades, is you kidnap people and you demand a ransom. And they do that to kids, and so they get a ransom. And then you have this herder-pastoralist conflict that's been going on for decades in northern Nigeria, where the sedentary farmers are under pressure because of desertification, poor soil usage, and deforestation, which has increased the range of the Sahel region, that thin belt that's semi-desert, like high desert chaparral between the Sahara and the tropics. And so that belt has been expanding in many places for decades and reducing the amount of rainfall because of climate changes, not as a consequence of carbon emissions, but a consequence of destroying the forest and misusing water resources primarily. And so there's conflict. The sheep herders and the goat herders want to come in a region and use it, but they can't find anything to eat because the grass isn't growing. So they let their livestock, tromp on the crops of the pastoralists. So they get angry, they take up arms, and they kill each other. So there's all kinds of conflicts here. And there's no doubt that Christians and Muslims are being targeted, but there's also truth in the matter that Christians are specifically being targeted by radical Muslims to exterminate and eliminate them. That's been going on for decades and has been ignored by the world. I've talked about it when I was in intelligence community, and I've talked about it in public since I've been in retirement many, many times. The fact that President Trump mentioned it is fascinating and interesting to see. It shows that he has a big global vision about what's going on around the world. And for the first time in my lifetime, we have a president that stands up for Christianity. That's never happened. Never happened. And the irony is, this is a guy that's been divorced a couple of times. He's had all kinds of supposedly extramarital affairs and all these moral failings. And here's the rich guy come along standing up for Christianity. Can you actually believe that? I mean, I can see Mike Huckabee standing up for Christianity. But,
Right.
but Donald Trump, I'm not saying it's wrong or I disagree with it, but I'm saying he's the most unlikely candidate to do it. But there was something to the evangelicals supporting him in 2016 that really they saw something, and maybe the evangelicals are right that other people miss in Trump, that maybe ultimately morally he's a good person, and that's why they supported him. But standing up for Christians, I think is a good thing. Christians have been under assault in America since the early 1980s. Remember how they used to attack Tammy Faye and Jimmy, and then Jim and Tammy Faye Baker? They kind of deserved it. They were excess. But I mean, going after Robert Schuller and other evangelists is ridiculous. So that it's become the fashion to mock Christians in the 1980s in America, and then it went from that to mocking white people, and then to mocking white males, and specifically targeting people. And all that's become a fashion in this country, and it's all morally repugnant and bankrupt. You shouldn't mock Muslims. You shouldn't mock Jews. You shouldn't mock Christians. You shouldn't mock white people or black people. You should treat people correct. The golden rule should apply here. But with leftists and communists and Marxists, they will belittle and attack anything that doesn't support their wicked ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about Iran, because that has been, I think, probably the biggest story in the last week. I think what was it for the last 15 days? I think they've been, people have been in the streets protesting. Now, for a while there, we were seeing a lot of videos that were getting put out there, and it seemed pretty obvious that you had something was different this time around than any other time when you've seen the protests. It seems like it wasn't just in one particular region, it was all over the country. And in all the major cities, you had major rioting and protesting going on. And you even had police officers and even people in the military who were, putting down their arms and were refusing to support the regime. But then all of a sudden, the lights were turned off, the internet's turned off, and now we're getting very little out of Iran. What's your assessment of what's going on there, and where do you think things are going to go from here? My concern, of course, has been I don't want to see what has happened in the past, where the people rose up and no one came to their aid to support them. I think we actually have a real opportunity to get rid of this evil regime that is there, and this isn't about regime change for the sake of bettering America. This is about saving the lives of millions of people who are at risk, I think, from being wiped off the face of the planet by these dictators.
Well, I'm not advocating adventurism or intervention on the part of the United States, but I can't say that we have a long history of giving people hope and leaving their hopes dashed on the shoals of misery. The Kurds being a good example multiple times over the past century, including at the end of the Iran-Iraq War, or not Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War, when President Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, in essence, encouraged the Iraqis and the Kurds in particular to rise up against Saddam Hussein, and then we sat back and let them be crushed. And I was heartbroken. I was there on the highway outside Basra, listening to the murders and the rapes going on every night, and there was nothing we could do. We were prevented from intervening, and so that's heartbreaking. And then the Iranians, of course, have risen up a few times in the past, including during Biden's administration, and just sat there and let them be slaughtered. President Trump's credibility, I believe, is on the line now if the United States doesn't engage here very quickly in one fashion or another. But as I've said on my program, I believe that we are actually already engaged without the public knowing about it in ways that most people wouldn't realize in controlling or interfering with or disrupting the communications of key government officials and also of the Revolutionary Guard to prevent them from being able to move around. But this one's different in many respects. This is not being driven by Trump, although no doubt some people feel empowered because they think Trump is going to come to their help, to their aid. But that's not what sparked it. What sparked it is the immense economic suffering of the people of Iran. Now, this regime is under sanctions, and they're crushing sanctions, but the crushing sanctions keep them from buying parts for their F-4 Phantom fighters, which are 50 years old. And the crushing sanctions keep them from doing illicit activity, but they still find money to support the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah and fund terrorism. instead of funding infrastructure in their country. And they still live in palatial mansions and palaces instead of the people. So the sanctions are not the reason for this. The reason for this is the economic collapse. The Iranian rial has collapsed to virtually no value whatsoever. I mean, remember the images of Germans during the Depression with wheelbarrow loads of marks to buy a loaf of bread. Well, that's what it's becoming in Iran, and the people are suffering immensely.
What
And
happened to
this,
all that cash that Obama dropped on the the tarmac for them, right?
well, a lot of it went to fund terrorism in the Middle East.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, it did. Yeah,
Absolutely.
and so that money belonged to the people of Iran and or the Shah, depending on your view. But the bottom line here is that this one is different. You know, when they murdered that woman for not wearing a scarf in police custody, sexually assaulted her, and then murdered her, young lady, and then they just basically pretty much wanted to dump her body on the street, essentially, just no respect for whatsoever. That led to the previous uprising, but it was localized in a few big cities. This is everywhere from what we can see. This is in every major city in Iran, and they can't respond to all these things. So they're in serious jeopardy here. This one is different, but this is a moment in time. I'm not asking for the United States to intervene militarily. I'm not demanding the United States do that. But what I am saying is that the president of the United States, his credibility is on the line tonight because he has made a promise. He said, we're locked and loaded. We will come to defense if they start killing people. Well, tonight, sir, if the reports are true, and you would have better information from the intelligence community than Nate or I do tonight at this hour. We don't have satellites. We don't have spies on the ground for CIA or Mossad. We don't have electronic intercept. I don't think Nate has that. I can't afford it. I don't have that. So tonight, you have that information in your hand, and you know whether it's true or not that thousands of people have been slaughtered in the last 24 hours. This is the moment in time. Will we wake up in the morning, Nate, and find the United States has done something in Iran? And there's lots of things that can be done to Iran. And look, this is not 1980. This isn't Desert One and the feckless response and the horrible mission that happened because U.S. forces weren't integrated. We weren't interoperable. And we had a mess there between the Navy and the Air Force and the Army, which is a total disaster. And that's a horrible situation. This is not Desert One. This is the raid on Caracas. This is what we have today. And I would love to see Delta and SEAL Team 6 and others in there and taking these guys out and removing them, and then just cut the head off the snake and see where we go from there. But if they don't act soon, at some point, if the people don't acquire arms, which they don't have access to unless they raid armories or bases there and get the arms, the security forces, if they have the will be able to crush this at some point.
Yeah, that's my fear. I hope that that there is an effort, by the West, and not just the West. I mean, look, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they have a just as much a stake in this. That nation has been a thorn in their side as well. So this is I think there is a chance that some support could come. And I do think they're going to need arms so that they can overcome the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
They are. What's interesting in this whole thing for me, of course, is someone that covers Africa and spends a lot of time in South Africa, is that I'm kind of I don't know, not maliciously, but I don't know what's the right word here for kind of in some ways enjoying the difficult situation the African National Congress now finds itself in. They've been singing the praises of Hezbollah, of Hamas, and of Iran. And, in fact, now Lady Ponto, the former foreign minister, went there and then came back. And suddenly the ANC, their cash problem was resolved for a bit of time. They paid off some debts. They had no money to pay it for the political party. And then, of course, she's the one that famously gave a congratulatory call to Hamas after October 7th, and then hosted Hamas terrorists in South Africa openly just a month or so after that, welcomed them to South Africa to congratulate them on murdering 1,200 people, most of whom were innocent civilians, only a handful of soldiers. Look, South Africa finds itself in a very difficult spot tonight, and I don't think many of them are bright enough to realize how much danger they put themselves in. They're in peril, and as are the innocent civilians in Iran. I saw the footage, if it's genuine, which I don't know the provenance of it, so I'm not going to attest to it. But the video footage I saw earlier this evening shows some truly horrific situation and a lot of body bags and a lot of bodies on the streets of Tehran, just Tehran. Scary.
Yeah. I think I think it is a scary situation. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about it? Let's say that the Iranian people are successful in running the Ayatollah out of Iran. At what point is it considered a victory? And then how do they rebuild their country? How do they prevent another dictator from stepping in there? What is the game plan for next steps? I mean, I'm sure our own government has got to be, working with people coming up with ideas. They would certainly want to have an influence on that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's going to be a tough one. I mean, we got in this mess in the first place because we backed the Shah, who became increasingly distant from his people and flaunted his wealth, which was shockingly, outrageously high, and at the expense of the Iranian people. That's how we got to this stage in the beginning. Also, the fact that geopolitically we were listless as we came out of Vietnam and had feckless presidents who didn't understand foreign policy, and foreign ministers like Cyrus Vance, a clueless idiot, and we wound up in a situation where we missed the rise of fanatical Islam. We missed that. We didn't see it coming. And when it came, we weren't prepared for it. So the problem in Iran going forward is that it's very dangerous. What comes next? A lot of people are excited about the Shah's son. I'm not excited about the Shah's son, going back and being the Shah of Iran. That's not something. I mean, maybe as a figurehead like the King of England with no real political power as an inspiring source, but he also has a lot of opposition. Just before we went live, within an hour of us going live, out in Los Angeles, there was a U-Haul truck that drove into a crowd of pro-Iranian supporters, and it was running down people with a sign on the side saying "No Shah, no dictatorship, no CIA." I mean, this is in America. This affects us. So I think going forward, it's going to be much harder than Venezuela. First off, we as Americans, our American government complex understands Latin America far better than we understand Iran. That's a problem. And the second thing is that it's much further away. Not in today's world, you can affect things instantly, but the point is that getting boots on the ground, when I mean not soldiers, but officials and negotiators and providing advice and consent to foreign officials who are taking over for government is much more complicated in Iran than it is in Venezuela. I mean, we can stage everything from Puerto Rico. Nobody can say anything. That's part of America. It's right there. We have to rely on Bahrain or somewhere like that will allow us to do things in the Middle East, because we can't really use the Israeli bases because it just makes us a target. Although we've used it before, I can neither confirm or deny that. Yeah. So it's a tough thing, Nate. I mean, it depends what shape things take, but we have to be very careful, because what happened to Romania is that the world was led to believe, and I was young and naive enough in my 20s to actually fall for the narrative that the people rose up against Ceausescu. No, the Securitate saw that they were in jeopardy, so they turned, and those who were smart and the army joined the protesters, and then they turned on Ceausescu. Now, that's what happened there. And then this so-called popular revolution was simply an overthrow from within Ceausescu's own movement, removing him and pretending to be reformers and coming into office. And Romania floundered for a number of years after 1989. It's now a country that's making progress, but for a long time, it was simply a country that was, Ceausescu's regime without Ceausescu. And that's what we have to be careful. If we can't have Iran be the mullahs without the mullahs, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I look at like Russia as another perfect example. Putin is basically, for all intents and purposes, a dictator there. He's gone from president to prime minister back to president, and then, avoiding and, killing off his own opposition. It's like it's run by gangsters, ex-KGB. So there is a doctrine that I know that some hold, right? That it's better to have a strong man, in some of these nations, to prevent that we can't export democracy everywhere. I would say that Iran is probably different than some other places of in the Middle East. I do think that there's places within the Middle East that I don't know that democracy will work because I don't know the people are ready for it. But I think the people of Iran are ready for it, and I think they want it. And not only that, but I mean, go back to the 70s, and I mean, these people were pretty modern. They were. It was just unbelievable. It looked like a scene in Tehran looked like Los Angeles.
Exactly. I was going to say it looks just like LA. And in fact, everybody looks the same. They're all tan.
and so I think a lot of the people growing up there, the whatever the Sharia law that has been enforced on the people, they've been basically adhering only superficially, but deep down inside, I don't think any of them have ever bought into that, except for maybe a few of the elites that are in power.
Well, Nate, I agree with you on that, but a word of caution: people live under that system, whether they believe it or not, have developed certain habits and beliefs that they don't even recognize, and their behavior won't always be in the fashion we expect it to be, as far as governing a country. But it's interesting because throughout my adult life, of course, I worked in geopolitics at the highest levels with the President of the United States, with prime ministers, with kings around the world on multiple continents, with admirals, generals, and throughout my life, it's always found fascinating that these academics and these leftists and these media pundits always come out and criticize America. Well, yeah, you supported dictators and you did this, that, and the other. Well, what was the other option? In Latin America, either you support the dictator or you ignore what's going on in the country. Also, people forget that we had a Cold War with the Eastern Bloc, with the Soviet Union for 45 years, and that it was a bipolar world. And the world wound up essentially being divided in bipolar fashion. And oftentimes you supported an unpleasant, immoral dictator in geopolitical purposes in order to achieve a geopolitical outcome. If you look at Siad Barre, he was supported by America, then supported by the Soviet Union, and then just fell apart later on. And you see countries. Ethiopia was a U.S. ally. They overthrew the Haile Selassie. They became Marxist. And under Marxists, they supported Soviet Union. Eventually, he was they threw the Marxists out. These are marriages of convenience, and people want to make moral judgments about marriages of convenience. Look, I don't like Tulsi Gabbard as the director of national intelligence. I don't trust her. I don't think she's ever handled anything more than a team of three, and is not a great leader. That's a personal assessment, but she's doing the job. She's the president's pick. For me, it's a marriage of convenience. I'm okay with that. I'll move on. I was skeptical about Marco Rubio as the selection for Secretary of State, and I am happy to be incorrect about that. He has really stepped up.
Yeah.
Sean Duffy at Transportation doing the same thing, stepping up. Look, we don't always get what we want, and sometimes we have to support people who are unpleasant around the world. That's just the nature of life.
Do you ever notice? Yeah. Do you ever notice that during Trump's rallies that was the song he was always playing at the end of his rallies?
Which one?
You don't always get what you want, but you get what you need.
Exactly.
He was messaging through that.
Well, again, he is 4 steps ahead. Look,
Absolutely.
And he's always been 4 steps ahead. This is why the guy's been successful. And it's so funny, like Trump, this guy has been bankrupt. No, Trump's never been bankrupted once in his life. Corporations he owned a piece of, or that used his name and licensed it, may have gone bankrupt, like the casinos, but Trump never went bankrupt. He's not stupid. Yeah. He didn't put his personal wealth tied up in that. It's, the guy is really smart. I mean, look at Truth Social. It's honestly, it's kind of a lame platform, but it's worth billions. And now they've merged into the nuclear energy field, which is going to be huge. I mean, really smart movements. Devin Nunes, I think, is the guy that's running that for him. Really smart. And nobody's even paying attention to that. Trump has set up Truth Social to be a couple $100 billion company a few years down the road, after, unfortunately, he's left the stage and his grandkids are there running it or something like that. Smart guy, really smart guy. And people misjudge him at their own peril. And I got to tell you this, Nate, before we wrap up. Trump derangement syndrome is a true psychosis. It absolutely is a psychosis. And there are people that need mental health care, including idiots in Minneapolis.
Yep. Hey, since we're on the subject of Trump and his genius, I've got to ask you, what are your thoughts on Greenland and why Trump has been saying the things that he's been saying about Greenland? What's the real objective there? Is it a multiple tiered objective like what we saw happen with Venezuela? I think it was more than just drugs. I think it was oil, it was drugs, it was geopolitics, it was keeping Russia and China in check. I mean, there's a lot of things involved there. It was also capturing him alive so that they could get all the intel on all of the bad actors in our own country who have been in league with him. That's what I really, truly believe is going to come out of this. But what do you see is going on with Greenland? I think there's multiple things there. It may be, rare earth minerals. It may be military bases and the need to protect the Arctic Circle. But what do you see it as?
Well, I think it's along the same lines, and I've said this all along. Trump offered to buy it the first time. They laughed at him, but they laughed at Seward when we bought Alaska for $7.5 million. He also was interested in buying Greenland at the time for similar reasons, and the Congress wasn't that interested. It didn't really go very far. And so Trump offered to buy it the first time. The reason for it is multifaceted, not the least of which is from a geostrategic standpoint. The Arctic Sea does have ice free flow for portions of the year now, and ships can transit the Arctic Sea. China is not an Arctic power, but they're behaving as if they're an Arctic power. They're invading the Arctic spaces, and they're trying to exploit minerals up there. They're putting themselves in position to interdict global sea lanes up there, and that's a problem. Russia, of course, is an Arctic nation, and the trip through the Arctic is much shorter than going around the globe because, of course, it's a sphere like this, and it takes much longer to go across than it does to go above because it's a shorter distance considerably. So that's one reason. The other reason is that it's undefended. Now, we have a treaty that pretty much allows us to do whatever we want, but I think Trump is looking for a little bit more than a treaty. That's a treaty from the Second World War. And of course, what people forget is that the only reason Greenland is free is because we defended it. During the Second World War, when the Danes, were like limp noodles, and the Germans overran them in about 6 minutes and took over the country, and they were like the French. Hello, we surrender. That's what the Danes did in order to prevent bloodshed. I mean, to be fair, but they were conquered by the Germans in a matter of a few hours, and only a handful of people died. I mean, less than 20, if I remember correctly. Denmark, the United States moved preemptively at the request of the Danes to occupy Denmark. Or occupy Greenland. Greenland went preemptively to Greenland and occupied it. Particularly, we built bases there and we used it. And it has a space base there now, Pifik, which used to have a different name. But the point is that there's more to it than that. The sea lanes, look where it sits, and the Gulf Stream that runs below that and keeps the seas ice free below Greenland. And also, of course, the one that everyone's latching onto is rare earth elements and minerals. It is full of minerals, but the minerals are only on the margins of the island. Most of the island's under 2 miles of ice, and we'll never get to it, not unless we heat the planet up by about 12 degrees or more. But there's a lot of reasons for it. But the biggest reason, in my view, is geopolitical. And Trump, he used the threat of tariffs. People forget he threatened Denmark with tariffs before he put the tariffs on the EU because they weren't defending it. After Trump did that, within 3 weeks, Denmark suddenly announced an $890 million package to buy 3 frigates and build a naval base in Greenland to defend the Arctic sea lanes, which is something they've been refusing to do for years. Now members of the Danish parliament are like, oh, no, we agree with you, Mr. President. We think it needs to be, but we've been strong partners in NATO and we've defended Greenland. Well, that's nonsense. They've done a few exercises. They haven't done anything significant there. All of that plays a role. And quite frankly, if we possess Greenland and it's an outright U.S. territory or state, which is unlikely, but a territory, what a great launching pad to make people pay for being miscreants. Just saying.
That's a very good point. Build one of those supermax prisons up there like they have down in El Salvador.
I hadn't even thought about that. I was thinking about, we have Diego Garcia, which we licensed from the Brits and the Chagos Islands off the east coast of Africa, which gives us reach into to the Middle East. And we also use bases in Europe. But having one there would give us reach into northern Russia.
That is true.
A lot of flexibility. So just saying.
Absolutely. Wow. I think this has been a really great discussion. We've gotten into a lot of topics. I always like to give an opportunity for my guests to share, we've talked about a lot of stuff, but what do you feel like is the biggest or most important point of our conversation tonight that you want people to get across?
I think tonight the most important thing, Nate, that people need to understand is that our nation's credibility is at risk because the statement President Trump said. I'm not trying to corner him, but he said we're locked and loaded and we stand with the Iranian people. Well, the Iranian people, if the reports are accurate, are being slaughtered at this hour. It's morning time now, coming morning in Iran, and who knows how many bodies are lying around. If we're going to act, we're going to have to do something soon. Otherwise, our credibility will be shot. And that's the last thing we need, because the president has shown resolve in Venezuela. He's shown resolve in Gaza. There's no peace agreement. Joe Biden sat around and fueled the war in Gaza. Donald Trump has ended the war in Gaza. No one's talking about Gaza. No one's talking about it. Not even South Africa has any basis to talk about it. And people are even talking less and less about Ukraine, although the killing continues there. But Trump is making some progress there. The point is that credibility is a currency that you don't want to squander. Trump has credibility as a decisive actor right now, and his word is his bond. And he needs to make sure that he doesn't let that slip away. So that's the message I have tonight. The United States either is going to help the Iranian people or we're not. And we have to make a decision one way or the other.
Do you think the meeting last night between Marco Rubio and Benjamin Netanyahu, emergency meeting apparently that took place last night, that had anything to do with possibility of intervention in Iran?
Well, apparently I've got an update here. It came through on my Twitter while we were chatting. It wasn't canasta. They were playing Uno. And apparently while they were playing Uno last night, I heard that Little Bird told me there might have been discussion about preemptive airstrikes on, Revolutionary Guard locations, telecommunications towers, some stuff like that. But I think that was, I think they were actually talking about, a war game that they were playing. But anyway, so apparently the Uno game went very well. Yeah, Risk. That's right. Well, that's what they're playing tonight. They're going to play Risk tonight. So we'll see what happens with Risk. But anyway, no, I don't know what they discussed, and it's fair to have supposition it was probably about that topic. Yeah. Iran is part of the axis of evil, and there is an axis of evil out there. People mock George Walker Bush for calling it the axis of evil, but look at North Korea, look at China, look at Russia, look at Iran. They are an axis of evil.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Colonel, I always like to end my show with prayer. I think there's a lot that we've got to do as a nation, but I recognize that sometimes we need help from on high. In fact, a lot of the time we do. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you for the Colonel's wisdom and great insights into these geopolitical issues that are going around the world. Lord, we lift up and pray for the people of Iran right now. Lord, we pray for the people of Venezuela as well, that they will be able to sort out and get back their freedom. And we also lift up those that are being slaughtered around the world, the Christians that are being persecuted around the world. We just pray, God, that you would bring peace to the world and that you would bring lasting peace, Lord, that would last at least a couple of generations. Lord, we pray for our president. We pray for the leadership in the State Department and in our Defense Department, that they would make wise decisions. And we pray, Lord, that you would help to realign things in the world. And I believe, Lord, that you are doing that. And I just pray that you would help to be a lasting realignment that would be for the betterment of mankind. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank all of you in the chat who engaged and who joined us tonight. It's been a great night. And I just want to say God bless all of you. And we'll have a wonderful one tomorrow too.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.